Guy walks into a bar holding 2 jumper cables. Bartender says, "You're allowed in if you don't start anything." So it's been a little while since we posted a video. A lot of things going on. Over the summertime, I mentioned this earlier in the summertime, things just get crazy. I'm outside all the time, fishing, hiking, mountain biking. We also had some other stuff go on. My daily driver broke down. Took a couple weekends to get that back on the road. Tree fell on the shed, had to repair the roof, yada yada yada. You get the point. A lot of other stuff going on outside of the Jaguar project, but we're back at it again. We've been working a little bit. We got the first, what I would say, quote unquote, performance modification is it actually going to work the way I want it to? I don't know. We'll eventually find out. Basically, what we did was we put Ford throttle bodies on the normal V12 manifold in place of the regular Jaguar throttle bodies, and so we had to build an adapter that would go from the intake manifold to the new throttle bodies, and that's shown here. So for the intake manifold portion of this project, we're going to replace the original throttle body that you see here. Mounts on like this. We're going to replace the original throttle body with a Ford version of the throttle body. So what I decided to do was replace the original throttle body with a 4.6 liter throttle body and intake elbow from a Ford Lincoln Mercury version of the Crown Victoria, right? So what that allows us to do is, if we look at just the Ford intake itself, right? So this is just a generic one from a junkyard. It's not modified yet for this project. What it allows us to do is we get a larger throttle body, we get a larger intake here, and we also get something of the ability to run a little bit more modern throttle position sensor here that you see there. We also get the EGRs are going to be blocked off, and we also get a pulse width modulated idle control valve that would go here. So that eliminates things like the hot start valve and other strange features like that you would normally find on the Jaguar V12 itself. So we're eliminating a lot of that stuff. We're going to go electronic control. Everything here would be controlled through the Mega Squirt 3 that we're eventually going to put onto the project. So to mount this intake elbow onto the intake manifold, we need either to cut the intake manifold up and weld a mounting flange on here, and then we can directly install this, which would be good if you had an extra set of intake manifolds. But again, one of the things I'm trying to do with this project is to allow the ability to unmodify this project, because you just never know where classic car values are going to go. Maybe 10 years from now, the XJS becomes a $300,000 collector car. You just never know in today's market. So what I did was I created this little adapter here, which, mind my welding, it's not the greatest on the outside, but it'll work for this project. The exterior welding is simply to hold the pieces together while I welded the inside, and then I ground those inside pieces so that they would pretty much port match the inside of the intake manifold, and then they will also port match the plenum for the Ford. So we should get a good transition there. We're going to have slightly higher, slightly bigger throttle bodies. We'll have better port matched systems. If you notice, when we put on the factory system, it's hard to tell from this side of the equation, but it is much smaller than what you would expect. So this system here, the piping here, there's a good example there. You can see how large, based on the mismatch of the oil ring there, how much smaller the throttle body here is compared to what this is, which is almost a direct match for what that is. And that size diameter is pretty much the same size diameter as this throttle body. So we're going to get much more intake flow based on this new modification. So the hope is we get better inflow, and that will obviously increase horsepower. But the one other thing you need to pay attention to when you're doing this is the threads here. If you notice, they go, it's hard to tell, but they do go directly through. Let me see if I can't. They do go directly through to the intake plenum. Okay? So if you're doing some kind of modification like this, where the bolts would go through and be accessible to the atmosphere, you're going to need to use a thread sealant. So a thread sealant similar to what you would use on any kind of bolt that would normally access your intake manifold or water jacket, such as Permatex thread sealant with PTFE. Here's a better view, so you can get it. This is, you can purchase this at AutoZone, but that's what you will need to use on the intake manifold side of the bolt. So you put some thread sealant on there, and then you would screw it in, and you would have a nice seal so that you don't suck in air through the atmosphere and not through your sensor systems. So one of the things I was worried about when I was building this modification is that the intake plenum would be much larger than the factory system, and it would be hitting the strut towers and all the other sheet metal within the engine bay. So what I did here was attach the new modification intake bracket here, and just kind of attached it with some random bolts to the new Ford intake, and to the original intake I attached the original intake manifold, and here's your air cleaner system. So if you look at them, they're roughly the same height. It's a little taller in the back for the Ford intake system here, and it's a little bit shorter in the front here. So I don't think we're gonna have any fitment problems when it gets into the engine bay. That's good news. Obviously this is not finalized. We have bracketry for the butterfly valve. We have some bracketry for the idle air control valve that needs to get applied, and only one side is going to get the idle air control valve. Very similar to the way it operates right now, is where one side does your idle air control and the other side doesn't. So all your idle air control will come from one side of the engine bay and not the other. But regardless, I don't think we're going to have any problem fitting this new modification into the system. But the big thing that is really important, I think, in my eyes, for performance-wise, is we're replacing, this will get a traditional little adapter and a cone type intake system. Of course, we're going to have a elbow that comes down over to the intake valve for the one side, but regardless, there's going to be a little maybe 3-inch adapter piece and an intake cone that would go here, so you'd have your air filter there. But the main thing, right? What the hell? Why the hell am I doing all this? We are replacing that air intake on the black air intake with a much larger air intake from the Ford system. So if we can compare the two, we are increasing our intake size drastically. And I believe that will provide, along with the exhaust modifications, that is going to provide us the performance that we're going to want out of this 5.3 V12. The other thing we had to do was build the throttle cable system to actually work with the different throttle bodies, because the Ford throttle bodies are cable driven, the Jaguar throttle bodies are linkage driven, and so what we did for that was we built some additional bracketry on the normal throttle positions, and we'll discuss that here. Okay, so here's what the Ford throttle body looks like when it's actually installed on the flange that we were showing before. Right now there's, the vacuum ports are open and whatnot, but we're going to get that solved. This is where we're going to hook up the PVC pipe, which would normally on these engines you would have just the PVC is not really a PVC system on these old Jaguar 12s. It's just a screen that attaches to the intake manifold. So we'll actually put a real PVC system on there. A little bit of update on that. And these, like I said before, they are cable driven. So here's your cable. Again, these are just mocked up on here. I don't have all my gaskets in. No, I know we don't have bolts in here, but this is just mocked up so I can get measurements, make sure the system is going to be working appropriately before we make any further progress. For the modifications to the Ford throttle body intake, the only thing I did was cut the bracket system here that would normally hold the other set of wires for the cruise control in the Ford car that this came from, and there is another tab here right there I had to cut off that would normally mount to the intake manifold on the Ford car, and that here on this side is to make room for the oil pan. The other thing is I blocked off the EGR ports, which we can add if we want to eventually. Again, these are just, nothing's bolted on here fully yet. This is just for mock-ups, make sure I can get everything in there right. We still have some work to do on that side, but for the throttle cable system, what I did was added an additional throttle wheel and some adjusters here. Built this bracket that holds onto the main system, and if you notice, there's room here, available room for the fuel rails, so we're plenty of room there. The other modification I had to do for the throttle body was increase this adjuster, because this system actually opens up less, maybe about 15 degrees less than the stock system, so we had to add an adapter, or not an adapter, I just had to make a bigger screw here so that when this goes fully open it hits the screw when everything else gets wide open throttles there. But we can show you real quick that this actually works. I don't know how well you can see there, but they both open up, so that's good. Each side. So we'll see how well this works. Again, I don't have like CFD stuff to do any kind of airflow. This goes slightly square, then round again, goes round, slightly oval, then round again. So I don't know if that's going to create any kind of reversions or weird waveforms, but we'll see. I think it's going to work for now. Again, just trying to get this not to be a crazy horsepower car, but something fun and enjoyable to drive. That's it for today, guys. Short video, just wanted to get you guys an update. Slow progress, I know. We're going to have to try to figure something out how to get back on track with this project. Once the engine stuff's done, once the engine modifications are done here, a little bit of left to do is, figuring out how to get the PCV valves in there, yada yada yada, and we should be back up and running. The rest of the projects are pretty much bolt-on type work, really. Suspension, We have the John's Cars quarter breed kit in. Got that on order. It should be coming here in the next couple of weeks. Then we'll be modifying the 4L60E, and the large long-term kind of work to do in the future is the electric modifications, because we're going to be going with an electric transmission, and we also need to do an aftermarket ECU. So those will be the big ticket items. The rest of the things, change out springs in front, change out springs in back, all that stuff will go pretty quick. So we'll keep you updated as we get going, as we keep going.